This workshop was by invitation only, and the genesis of it was to try to help us together think about how do we continue to improve the questions and the way that we go about answering the questions that are relevant to the agriculture to nutrition pathways and elucidating those. So today is a workshop. And I'd like to make a couple of comments before we begin. It's a what is evidence workshop. So we're presenting this as a question. And I suspect many of us come at this what is evidence from different perspectives. Now, I had an esteemed biostatistician professor who on her door had a saying, "In God we trust, but everybody else must bring data." So yes, if it comes from God, we'll trust it, but we mere mortals actually have to bring data, have to bring evidence in order to prove certain things. So what is evidence? We're going to explore that. And I think there's a whole spectrum of what might constitute evidence, and I hope in this workshop we'll begin to ask ourselves, what is considered high-quality evidence? How can we tell the difference between strong versus weak evidence? And I don't know if we'll get to this other question, but it's one obviously that policymakers have to consider, and that is, how much is enough evidence before you take action? And I think we can all agree that we never know everything, but we still need to act. And I think that's a judgment call, and maybe we can have some discussion about, where does evidence have to sit before we feel comfortable taking action? I think you'll see a bit of a, I think, Alan, you'll probably present something similar, but if one begins to look at the spectrum of evidence, one can begin with expert opinion. And in many cases, for better or for worse, people trust experts. Beware. Beware. Those of us who pontificated the last 2 days and did not provide evidence, I think one has to, while one has to have respect for experts, I think there's a lot of dogma that those of us who are so-called quote-unquote experts, our views might be more dogmatic and need to be challenged. You have then a various number of sorts of observational kinds of techniques for collecting data. Uncontrolled longitudinal studies like the Poshan community studies, which was a panel study that is not controlled, is not intervening. You have controlled longitudinal studies, and then you have things called experimental, or that are often called randomized control trials. And a couple of things just to think about, and I hope we'll have a chance to talk about, is, well, some of these are useful for generating hypotheses, but you'll see another word called bias, and you'll see 2 or 3 pluses next to those. And that is that the bottom of the period, at this pyramid, some of these are useful for generating hypotheses, but in fact are very, very much subject to bias. And as you get into different kinds of research designs, you feel that bias is more minimized, and you begin to think, well, maybe there really is a causal relationship. And another way of looking at that is, how confident are you in the truth? How confident are you that what the intervention was, or the set of interventions, were really led to a change? And you go from low at the bottom of the pyramid to high. But I'd like to just make one other comment. No matter what kind of research you do, I think there's one principle that we have that I'd really like us to discuss, and that is rigor. Because if you're going to collect data, even if it's of sort of the observational type, if you don't apply rigorous methods, you're introducing even more potential for getting a very, very off or false answer. So, this is already done. Okay, so a couple of key concepts that hopefully we'll have a chance to discuss, and I'll just throw them out there to think about Well, let's think about primary versus secondary research. Let's think about experimental versus observational versus secondary studies or studies of studies. Let's think about things such as measurement validity. Let's think about internal validity. These are terms that we'll probably talk a little bit about. Let's talk about transparency. For example, who funds or who doesn't fund the research, what the interests are. Appropriateness of design, what goes into knowing whether a design is appropriate, and how that could be strengthened. So those are just things to keep in mind as we hear some talks and raise questions. So we will have a full morning where we will have 3 speakers and then have an open discussion, and we will then have the distribution of global development and environmental social science library packets. I haven't seen those. But you, because you're here by invitation only, you will get, what is that? But hopefully it's something good. Now we have cameras here because an opportunity to interact like this with people who have done research, with yourselves, stimulates rich discussion that can benefit people beyond this room. We had to set a limit to this room so that the cameras are here that hopefully will be able to webcast this more widely or have it on a server that students or others who can't be here today can listen to and perhaps learn from. So without any further delay, let me call, I guess we'll call you one at a time. And so we'll call Patrick Webb first, who will talk about a review of the systematic reviews. So right away you can tell that's not primary. Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. Keith West. Oh, let me put my glasses down. Sorry, Keith West, and he will pose the question and perhaps answer it. What constitutes rigor in study design? Keith?